All right, super excited to have our guest on today, Dr. Carol Talbot. And Dr. Carol is the master of transformation and a catalyst for change and a guide for those to awaken their highest potential. And Dr. Carol, I was really blessed to be on your podcast about maybe 2 weeks ago, which was a lot of fun. I know we got into some great conversations. You're passionate about advocating for expanding consciousness, unlocking superhuman abilities inherent in all of us, and a PhD in quantum morphogenetic science, and doing pioneering research on DNA biogenesis and source feeding is reshaping our understanding of human potential. A master firewalker instructor, which we'll
Oh,
have to
yes.
talk about. 'Cause that's pretty cool. NLP master trainer and author of Reimagine You. Dr. Carol is here to inspire us and push us beyond perceived boundaries and embrace amazing new possibilities. So, Dr. Carol, with all that being said, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing really, really good and glad to be speaking with you again because our conversation of all things energy and healing was so enlightening and exciting last time, and particularly so surrounded by all those beautiful crystals that you have.
Yes, the crystals are always just a good little centerpiece, and I absolutely love being in that little field of all my little friends, as I call them. We're all hanging out together. I think sometimes they're talking to me. Sometimes I probably need to do a better job listening. But with all that being said, where now you've got endless possibilities is kind of where the whole thing goes, right? I mean, because we really are living in a world with endless possibilities. And where would you like to start today? I mean, we can get into a lot of different things, but I guess since I'm so intrigued about the firewalking, maybe we could start there. Tell us a little bit about how you got into that. Tell us a little bit about first your background and how you got into this field and kind of what in your life, you know, kind of molded you into the person that you're at today.
Okay. So firewalking, sort of one of the oldest transformational tools for humanity and practiced in many different cultures around the world. For me, I've always been interested in the superhumans, the masters, and the gurus. There's a lovely series of books you've probably come across called The Masters of the Far East. And in that book, they talk about a group of scientists way back in the 1800s who went to the Himalayas to meet with the masters and spend time with them. And during their time, they witnessed all sorts of phenomena from walking on water, from manifesting huge feasts and banquets out of nothing, from teleportation, being in two places thousands of miles apart within moments. And so for me, when I hear about those kind of things, I always think, if they can do it, how come I've not been taught to do something like that? And of course, the other thing that those amazing phenomena prompt is, could it be something to do with our DNA that allows for such phenomena? So I've always wanted to sort of push the boundaries of what's possible, hence firewalking. Because many of us have been told if you put your hand in fire, you're going to get burnt.
Hmm.
And to a large extent, that can be true. Yet, firewalking, as I said, has been practiced in cultures around the globe for many different reasons, for purification, for healing, for power, for energy. And it's such a beautiful element as well. So when people come to an experience like that, we've got billions of neurons constantly wiring and firing, and our neurons are often wired in a specific way, which is the reason that we respond and react in a specific way. But when you come to an experience like a firewalk, most people don't know how to respond and react. I mean, it could be fear. I'm not going to do that. However, what it does is when they do walk across those coals completely unharmed, it allows new neurological connections to be built. And more importantly, for them to ask the question, if I can do that, something I've been told and taught, programmed and conditioned that's totally impossible, yet I did it. What else can I do in my life? What else have I been taught and told and conditioned to believe that's not true? So basically, it expands the paradigm that we're in. So, from the moment of we're born, we're given a name, a history, a set of beliefs placed into a sort of limited box. And then when you do these kind of powerful experiences, it sort of breaks the mold. It expands your model of the world, that what else can I do?
Hmm.
So I've been running firewalks in this part of the world, in the Middle East and beyond, for probably nearly 2 decades. And I've seen, even young children walk across those coals, and it's such a powerful experience that I always say it doesn't matter what I've said in terms of motivating people or revving them up or getting them inspired that they would want to give it a go. When they do walk across those coals, the magic is within those coals. It creates amazing shifts. And coming back to your work, Sean, it's also extremely healing because if you think about it, our feet, like our hands, like our ears, our whole body is reflected on the base of our feet. And we know this through reflexology. So, what I have found when I'm running firewalks, if people get what we like to call a fire kiss, in other words, if they feel a little bit of heat in a certain part of their foot, what's very interesting to note is where and where it links into the physical body. And usually they'll tell me they have an issue there. I remember one person walking and he shared with me he'd recently had an operation on his shoulder. Guess where he felt the heat? On the part on the foot that would correlate to the shoulder. And I always say to people, instead of sort of resisting, allow that heat, allow that energy in. And the next day, he said it felt so free, the movement, everything felt better about it. So I look at it as healing energy. It's another form of healing.
Yeah, that's really amazing because when you mention reflexology, every part of the body can be connected through the foot, right?
Or the hands, or
Or
even
the
the ears.
hands or the ears, right? And
Or
so,
then there's iridology and sclerology from the eyes as well.
oh my gosh, yeah. So how long, like, I mean, I've never firewalked, right? So I've heard a lot about firewalking, and I don't like, there's just that part of it that's like you said, that's kind of like saying, okay, there's just something that tells me maybe this isn't the right thing to do. But then you've got these people that I'm sure you do it in groups that are walking right in front of you, going right through it. And it's so empowering, I'm sure, that once you've gone through and done it, like you said, you've unlocked this challenge within you to say it's not possible, and then it is. I like the way you tie it into actual physics and chemistry within the body, where new neural pathways are being connected and new connections are being made, and you're getting that sort of enlightening overview of saying, wow, there is a lot of things that I keep thinking are not possible, but clearly they are. So in the years that you've been doing it, do you have any stories of, aside from that, that are people that have kind of overcome that obstacle mentally to do that, or have achieved things?
Honestly, I've seen thousands and thousands of people go through the firewalk. What I would say, and even people who've done it before, doesn't prevent you feeling another layer coming up the next time you do it.
Hmm.
I've walked across those coals hundreds of times myself, yet I'll still say, there's still something there when you stand in front of those hot coals and you think, she wasn't kidding about the heat. It really is hot. That more layers come up because after all, we are an onion. There's always more to uncover. There's
Right.
always more to learn. So I feel that it unpeels many, many different levels. And saying this, Sean, I never force anybody to walk because actually I believe that it's sometimes braver for people to say, it's not for me right now. And
Yeah.
you see different different things go on with people. There's usually someone in the group who wants to go first, who wants to go first. Then there's others who want to watch other people go through it, which, if you think about it, in business, in life, that's often called benchmarking the competition or modeling excellence. So you see somebody else do it, and then in your mind, you think, well, if they can do it, then maybe there's an opportunity for me to do it. Yet there's still that feeling of, is it really possible? The interesting thing that I have noticed is with children, with young children in particular, they don't have any fear. And
Hmm.
I remember running a firewalking event in uh, Egypt, I believe it was, and there were some very young children, and they just never tired of going back and forth across those coals. I mean, their parents had to sign a waiver. This is dangerous, and
Yeah.
it's not about going out and building a fire in your backyard. We use specific wood. Different woods have different heat. Different woods also have different coaling properties. So, there's certain woods that are very high heat that I wouldn't use because it's about making an event successful,
Hmm.
and not sort of pushing the boundaries too far. What I've noticed though with young children, they don't have fear, but there becomes an age, maybe anywhere from like 9, 10 into the teens, where, this is where they've been indoctrinated with more schooling and placed into that boundary of what's possible and what's not. And I feel that's sad because that also narrows us down. And you see this all the time, Sean, in terms of what's possible in terms of health and healing and getting
Hmm.
the body back into balance. And I
Hmm.
know a lot of the devices and a lot of what you utilize is not giving people more, it's allowing them to be in the right energy, the right space and
Hmm.
place and right frequencies that allow for healing to take place. And that also includes the mindset, because we are energy and we have many different energy bodies. So for dis-ease to come into the physical form, it's gone through a different lot of levels, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, to come into the physical form. And there's also the reverse as well. So when you have a goal or a dream, you've had that dream or goal mentally, and now you want to be able to bring that into physical materialization. So it works all the way around when we understand that we are multidimensional beings
Hmm.
and that we can also pull intelligence from other aspects of ourselves. After all, only a very small part of our consciousness is stationed in this identity.
Hmm.
What I'm saying is, as you expand and maybe do things that you've been taught and told and conditioned are impossible, you start to expand in your consciousness and your awareness and who you really are. And that maybe as you repair your DNA as well, that what the superhumans, the masters and gurus, isn't just the stuff of, science fiction or fantasy novels. It could be our reality. And I truly believe that's true.
That's one thing we share very deeply is our background and love for, I call it Vedic culture, but it gets into all the sects and all the different things which you could, lineage down. But if you bring them all back to the Vedic tree, and I've been a guy that's been to India, and I've been around what we would call Siddha Mahatmas, which are, yogis. But the thing that's interesting is that that's part of their culture. So if you really want to develop that, it's a process, and it envelops, years of training. Usually it's all through disciplic succession, meaning that you find a guru or a yogi and they kind of take you under their wing and they sort of bring you through that process where you can start developing all those skill sets that are all inherent within all of us. So I don't know if you've ever read, I'm sure you have. I know you have Autobiography of a Yogi.
Yes, and of course, the Indian tradition, the superhuman abilities are all the siddhis.
Yeah.
Um, so are they possible? Absolutely. And of course, like you say, the culture there is so much more open. So, for example, I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, And as you know, I source feed, which means I'm on the breatharian path, level 3 breatharian. So I do eat occasionally, but I nourish myself in an alternate way. And of course, the person I was speaking to said, Carol, I was brought up in this culture, in an Indian culture, where that is totally possible. Whereas
Hmm.
when I speak to other people, they usually, the first thing they do is go, what's that? Or
Hmm.
how is that possible? So in terms of cultural conditioning, it makes a big impact in how you open up to what's possible and
Hmm.
what's not.
Hmm. Yeah, I know another thing too is a lot of yogis do something called sun gazing, where they're able to basically harness the energy of the sun to bring in the energy that they need to also run their body, and they can run for very long periods of time with little or no food also. And so for me, it was probably about the age of 20 maybe that I read Autobiography of a Yogi. And I was actually very close. Well, I grew up in San Diego, where I spent the majority of my life. I was about 4 blocks away from a Hindu temple. And then the SRF, which was the Self-Realization Fellowship that Paramahansa Yogananda started, they had a beautiful place. It's called Swami's in Encinitas, and it's a huge yoga center there. It's one of the best,
Beautiful
beautiful
gardens.
gardens,
And
and
on the cliff
on the
overlooking
yes,
I've been there. I've
yes.
been there several times.
Yes, and so, that was my backyard. That was where you could go. And of course, it's one of the best surf spots also. So for, everything else, the scenery, it's amazing. It's actually been said that about 100 feet under is a massive layer of crystal rose quartz. And so that whole area of Encinitas is apparently under a massive layer of quartz crystal, which really would emphasize why it's such a loving yoga. It's all peace, love, yoga, but in an upscale way because it's right next to Rancho Santa Fe, which is definitely one of the wealthiest communities in the country. But what was it that kind of got you started in that path, like growing up? What were some of the milestones that you took interest in that kind of, started bringing you into that knowledge base? And
I guess, as I said, I've always had a thirst for knowledge, a hunger. So I loved reading. And I guess I had an unusual upbringing in that my mother was very interested in the philosophy of Ouspensky, Gurdjieff. And then it was later on I found that my grandfather also had all the books of Madame Blavatsky, Alice Bailey. So I would imagine it's been passed down the line. However, I do remember as a child my mother taking me along to many different things. And actually, at the time, I was somewhat frightened by some of it. Actually, when she used to take me to sort of psychic circles and things, I used
hmm.
to actually feel a little bit frightened. But, I guess I didn't take the academic path initially in terms of going to university. And instead, my school was going on courses. And to be honest with you, Sean, I was, and probably still am, a bit of a joke with friends because they used to call me a course junkie. So, where other people go on holiday, I would decide each year what self-development programs I was going on. And then when I found there was a time when my brain was full, I decided that it was also time for me to go traveling and learn in a slightly different way to, you know, have more different experiences. And at times you find you've read enough, you've been on enough courses, and you're not taking any notes. You actually need to empty out and allow new things in. And I've always had that desire to come across information that's a little bit left of center, that not everybody has heard about or knows about. And in terms of my PhD in quantum morphogenetic science, that actually has a little bit of a backstory to it because I remember coming back from the States, I'd been on a month-long program, listen to this, to learn how to walk on water.
Wow.
Did I succeed? No, Sean, I just sank each and every time. But it was, I mean, my mentor at that time is the most extraordinary woman. She's called Star Fuentes. She's in her 80s and she is extraordinary. Anyway, I was coming back and I was still in that very much that phase of seeking, searching, seeking, searching. I still hadn't found what I was looking for, so to speak.
Hmm.
And stopping off in the UK with my mum, she showed me a manual and it looked very complicated. And I flicked through it, and it was from a course she'd been on about 20 years earlier. And so thought nothing more of it, came back to Dubai, which is where I'm based, and I saw there was a little talk, a free talk going on at one of the centers, the alternative centers here. So I went along, and Sean, you've probably had this experience where you go in and you get that bing, bing, bing. There's something for me to learn here. I
Hmm.
need to mentor with this person. So I went back the next day to have a chat with him. And it turned out he knew my mentor in the States because he'd also worked with her, had been her promoter, knew her very well, but their work was slightly different. Then he had to take a phone call and he said, "Oh, while I take this phone call, just have a look at that manual." It was the manual my mother had shown me. So when I got home, I called my mum and I said, "Show me that manual again." His name was on it. She had been on a program with him 20 years earlier with him and his then wife when they just started introducing this extraordinary material at that time called chelontic science. And when information comes to you in such an unusual way, in a number of different ways, it's to me the universe saying, we've told you this way, that way, and every which way we can. Here's, when you get a message, but could you just give me fireworks and say it 3 times, just so I
Exactly.
know I've got it? Um,
Exactly.
then it sort of really kicked me that this is something I need to study and something I need to be involved in. And I have to say, it was a huge trajectory because it's a huge body of work. It's understanding our multidimensional anatomy, understanding DNA and the multidimensional aspects of DNA, our true cosmic history in terms of how our DNA is distorted. And of course, if your DNA is distorted, then this is one of the reasons that we do not remember our true cosmic history and we don't remember who we truly are. We
Hmm.
do not remember our brilliance. And this is where the superhumans and the masters and the gurus, this
Hmm.
is the reason that I say their abilities may have to do with that their DNA is not so distorted as
Hmm.
ours, such that you begin to remember who you are and you can demonstrate these innate abilities, which I believe are how we were originally designed, the
Hmm.
true eternal human. But through distortions over millennia, through digressed races, also through the toxins in our food, in our air, in our water supply, and in the programming and conditioning, we've been dumbed down and again placed in this very limiting box.
Hmm.
And so, through source feeding, through my PhD in research on bioregenesis of the DNA blueprint, and through all that I've studied, it starts to come together. And this is where I'm also grateful because one of the reasons I was such a seeker and searcher was because I always wanted to be clairvoyant or clairaudient, or, all my friends used to say, "Carol, did you see that? Did you hear that?" And it'd be, "No," and there seemed to be a block there. However, that block was what kept me searching. And of course, now I know, and I say no because that's also a superhuman ability and very much quicker often than being clairvoyant or clairaudient, where you've got so much noise or so many pictures. And I'm sure you're the same, Sean. You just know.
Hmm.
And it's very clear, it's very clean. And it also helps you have a huge level of discernment. I always like to say my bullshitometer is very high.
Hmm.
And you can see, who's who, what's what, because as you know, Sean, there's a lot of misinformation
Hmm.
out there. And you also know from the products that you utilize and that you are using, they work. And you know that there's also a lot of misinformation on devices that people are making claims about that really do not do anything.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it has to do with motive. There's a lot of different motives of people that get into different fields and different technologies. And one of the most important things that I have found is not necessarily even the technology, but who's behind it and what are they doing and what are their motives and really feeling them out. And when I say feeling them out, I mean like putting eyes on them and listening to them speak and really trying to pick up a vibration from them to determine authenticity, to really check mannerisms and really, and then even feed on, just a lot of information. And it's actually fairly timely. There is a huge system that's been put out. I'm not going to mention it or mention names because if anybody's out there, they'll know. But there was a energy frequency system that was put out that became very successful, and there's probably 300 or 400 of those within the United States, maybe 500 or 600 around the world. They really did a good job of getting this technology out. It was basically lasers colliding, creating scalar energy fields that people could sit in. But just recently, there's a huge shakeup that the person that claimed was the inventor actually was not the inventor. And they tried to steamroll the person that actually did invent it. And it's a whole story. But, well, what's interesting is that also transitions into the yogis and the mysticism because there's a few things I'm going to touch on with that. So thank you. Within India, because these cities and these different processes of developing sort of, I guess we call them mystic powers, but when you're in the field and you understand it, you know that we're just developing our own basic skills. But many times what happens is that if somebody does that, they start getting a lot of followers and what we say is it puffs them up and their ego becomes very big. So rather than staying humble and in a serving mode, they kind of get into this mode where they're sort of the king of the castle and they just feed on all this people oohing and ahhing all over them. And that can be very dangerous because the ego is really the last piece that needs to be taken out to really get spiritual advancement. So when you're there in that realm of a guru or a sadhu or whatever it is, and you've got that and those followers, but then so you have to be conscious of that hey, this is possible, but and always be it's when you're getting into these realms, it's very, very, very subtle and it's very, very like you have to really closely watch your thoughts because you're in a realm now where thoughts are being picked up and the karmic backlash of the wrong thoughts or the wrong implications can even get fairly big. But then you get into these other sadhus that really, even though they might have these abilities, they're 100% the servant of the servant of the servant. They're just so grateful and so humble. And when you're around a lot of different people and different groups and all that, and you can really pick up right away. And not to be disrespectful, because in all honesty, I love everybody. I'm not here to judge, but you have to be careful when you're dealing with not only the technologies, some of the spiritual in any realm, right? It could be in any faith of anything that you've got certain people that might be preaching stuff that really truly it's in their heart of heart and they live that life, and people that kind of just throw it out there because it sounds good and it's kind of become just part of a job or a routine. The thing that I find interesting also is that with the technology, which we were touching on earlier, the technology is only as good as the mind in some cases is open to bringing it in, right? And there's times when you can still get benefit from it. But when you're dealing with the plasma energy technology, you're dealing with conscious, intelligent, mindful, intelligent energy fields. And therefore, everything now that's in the mind and for intention and all these different things, they play into it. It's not, you're going well beyond a third dimensional bodily reality. You're getting into now, like you were saying, these different energy fields and your subtle energy fields and your consciousness. And so being able to tie that all together and embrace that, that's when you're actually fully utilizing the technology. And it takes time and it takes layers to start unveiling or like getting into the, like you said, the onion, getting into that core heartfelt space where you're open, you're embracing, you're in a loving energy field, and now that energy field is working even more intently on bringing the benefits that you're looking for, your homeostasis or recharging the energy fields or fixing that part that, might have issues. So, it's interesting how all these things sort of interconnect. And, I love the work you do, all the work on the DNA. I mean, I said to somebody the other day, I was actually talking to a gentleman, Tim Doyle, who's also got a podcast, and he was talking about how he had ruptured a couple discs in his back. And it wasn't until he reprogrammed his mind to said, I'm going to fix this and I'm going to just move through that he started really fixing it. And all the time that he was in all that pain until he shifted his mindset, he could not get out of it. I said, there's so many manuals in world that we've got. When we get any new technology, we get a manual for it. It's like, here's how you work this. But where is the manual to unlock the brain, right? Where is the manual to say, okay, these are all the God-given abilities that we've got, and let's go into our instruction manual here and figure out how we kind of process through or work on this or enhance this ability. So, with that being said, I'd like to dig in a little bit more and talk about DNA because I really feel that, for the average person, they probably don't know a lot about it. I'm not anywhere close to as educated on as you are, but can you talk to us a little bit about basic structures of DNA? And is there things like through different processes of breathing or through some of the different yoga processes that can enhance or benefit DNA?
Yes, as I said, it's multidimensional, and I believe that this is the difference between the masters, the superhumans, the gurus, and where we are because of the distortions that we hold in our DNA, and the limitations that have been placed on us through our conditioning and education. So if you think of your DNA like a treasure chest, and you're given a key, but when you get the key and open the chest, you find it only opens a very small portion of the chest. The rest is what mainstream science tends to call junk DNA. I like to call it intron DNA because the word intron means possibility and potential. And it's within that potential that lies the opportunity for expanded awareness, activating those superhuman abilities. So, another way of thinking of your DNA is as a musical instrument. And right now, we're only playing one tune and we only have one instrument. But as you begin to bring more of your DNA online, then you bring in more instruments. You can start to play more harmonics, more different frequencies. You see colors, you hear sounds. You start to see infrared or ultraviolet, like it opens up the multidimensional symphony, so to speak.
Hmm.
But right now, because of the distortions, it's like having a light bulb with a dimmer switch. It's just on a faint glow. And going back to what I said, when your DNA is distorted, if you think of a film strip, um, in a projector, when light hits the film strip, it projects what's on the film strip onto an outside screen. But if there's scratches and glitches on that film strip, then on the projector, it'll be a kind of like glitchy looking movie. So it is with your DNA. If there's distortions in your DNA, when that stream of consciousness comes in, when it hits the DNA, it projects your outer world is what's projected by your DNA. And it means that your physical, mental, emotional world is glitchy because there's glitches in your DNA.
Hmm.
And actually, 90% of the stream of consciousness that should be available to us is turned off. And going back to what I said, this is why we don't remember who we truly are,
Hmm.
our true cosmic history, that we live a very small life. And, we don't open up to the fact that we are multidimensional, that portions of our identity at the soul level, the oversoul, the avatar, the rishi, the Buddha, we start to remember the stairway to heaven, so to speak, the
Hmm.
pathway back to source, and our step down from source. So your world starts to open up in a whole new way as more of your DNA comes on stream. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there in terms of, activating your DNA. Oh, you go to a meditation and boof, you've activated your DNA. I don't think so. People talking about 12-strand activation. You wouldn't be in this physical form if you had all that activated. We would lose our physicality because at different levels of identity, we have certain types of physical form, and other we're more plasma. We're more energetic
Hmm.
form. And of course, we come from the sound and light fields when we step down, and we also understand the collectives that we're part of. We also then begin to understand playing in different timelines and playing in different realms. So there are ways to start repairing your DNA. The way that I chose, which is rather a radical approach, and coming from firewalking and spending a month learning to walk on water and the radical things that I do and I'm interested in, it's no wonder. I chose bioregenesis of the DNA blueprint through source feeding. Source feeding being the breatharian path, also called pranic living, and seeing if it was possible to live through, you talked about sun gazing, and being in light. I've also spent 10 days, 10 nights in complete darkness in a darkroom retreat, also where there was no food served. Also, darkness has many gifts because when you're in the dark, you release huge amounts of melatonin. And of course, melatonin is involved in DNA repair. Not only that, there's studies that show if you meditate on a regular basis, you release probably 500% more melatonin than people who don't meditate, which means if you meditate, you're already on the path to repairing your DNA. So there are many different ways: sun gazing, meditation, being in the dark, releasing huge amounts of melatonin, and being in the dark for extended periods also produces pinoline, 5-MeO DMT, full-blown DMT experiences. And if you go beyond the 15-day mark, you'll probably start to activate seeing infrared, ultraviolet in terms of seeing people's energy field. Breath work, as you mentioned, that's also a wonderful way because with breath work, and from yoga, particularly on the pranayama part of yoga, that you're clearing the nadis, the little channels in the body, and that your breath activates the lymph system. From my point of view, with source feeding, it was if food, and particularly the food that we eat these days, because it holds an energy signature from where it was grown, how it was packed, how it was prepared. And most of our food is packaged, pumped full of hormones, pumped full of additives. It's hard to call it food. But what we do eat, that energy signature blends with your own and can either help you or harm you. So you go back to the sort of masters and gurus who, when they did eat, they'd always bless their food
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
raise its frequency so it
Hmm.
would be a better match for
Hmm.
your own.
Hmm.
So with source feeding, I'm taking out the main part that creates distortions in our DNA. And here's the other interesting thing, Sean. One of the questions I ask people often is, why do you eat? And we eat for many different reasons. It can be emotional, it can be because we're bored, happy, sad, social. But often people say, oh, because I'm hungry or because I need energy. Well, our cells need energy to repair the body and repair the DNA. But food does not directly give energy to your cells. It has to go through a very complicated process to create something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is the fuel of the cells to repair the body. So when you take in food, and particularly food that has a bad energy signature or has a lot of toxins, it goes through a complicated process, and your cells have to squeeze even a drop of energy out of that. And then what's it dealing with? That little drop of energy it's got is dealing with the toxins and additives in the food rather than on repairing your body and repairing your DNA. So what I find when, as a level 3 breatharian, I do eat occasionally, because you miss taste, you miss flavor. So I usually, when I have, rather than water, I usually have diluted juice or diluted soup, maybe a cup of tea every now and then. But when I do eat, and yesterday I was with some friends and I had lunch with them. It was about an hour and a half to drive back home. And I said to my friend who's also in the car, I said, nudge me awake, because when I do eat, it gives me no energy whatsoever. I'm almost asleep.
Hmm.
And think about it, Sean, when you're ill or unwell, and you know this from all the people that you support and help, they don't want to eat.
Hmm.
And we force them to eat, but their body says no, because when you fast, and particularly with dry fasting, you activate autophagy really, really quickly. And also that's when the stem cell crew come in to repair the body. So then you're getting the body back into balance and allowing it to do what it does best, what it cannot do with synthetic hormones, synthetic drugs, with food laden with toxins and additives. So, with your technology and, removing the toxins, you not only repair the DNA, but you allow the body to do what it does best, bring back its own intelligence and get back into balance, get back into nature. So
Hmm.
even, just being outside, think about, you've probably done this where you've taken a glass of water and put it outside in sunlight. Many people do that to energize it, as we do with our beautiful crystals. We put them out to sort of refresh them, to energize them. So when you think about it, our body is 60 to 70% water. So even when you're putting yourself out in water, think of your body like the glass.
Hmm.
Your body has the ability to absorb that energy like plants do in photosynthesis. And this has been proved as well. It's been proven. And give energy to your cells and the water in your body. So there's many, many different ways for energy nourishment. And one of the things I speak to people about and on the platform is reimagining nourishment, that it's more than just what's on your plate. So source feeding in the breatharian path may be a big stretch for people. And for me, it was more of a spiritual initiation as well. And it is to be a frequency match for such an experience or such a way of living. But just to reimagine, as I said, that nourishment and energy is more than what's on your plate.
Hmm.
And as you take in less, then your body can start to repair the DNA, and then you see more of your abilities, or the clairs, clairvoyant, clairaudience, or the superhuman abilities come on stream. And like you said, your discernment, being able to see that maybe this technology was working, and now the ownership has changed, the intention, the emotion behind it has shifted, and therefore that's impacted how this energy, how those frequencies are received.
Hmm.
Does it make a difference? Absolutely.
Hmm.
And that, as I said, you become more discerning. You see when something's off. You feel when something's off, and you're not afraid to say it, which means that, we often beat to our own drum, and other people, think, oh, maybe thanks, but no thanks. And you don't really mind, because each to their own. And it also supersedes it doesn't mean that you're saying this is black or white, good or bad. You can disagree and still respect people, but it goes beyond polarity, because once you're in polarity thinking, you're already in, light's good, dark is bad, not necessarily.
Mhm.
That it's all needed in this beautiful game realm that we are playing in.
I love that. You say polarity, and also the synonym to that is duality, right? So,
Yes, or
it,
or here's a lovely word I love, a dichotomy.
right.
Love that
Yes.
word.
And the beautiful part is I hope that at some point everyone gets a chance to get into Vedic knowledge because getting into sort of there's so many terminologies, fifth dimension, all these different dimensions, but really when you're at a really high level of spiritual awakening or spiritual process, you superseded duality. Duality no longer exists, and it's the world of what we call Sat Chidananda, which is eternal, full of knowledge, full of bliss, right? And so when people talk about the angels, and I was talking about this the other day, and they're presented, they might not even be in a physical body, but just that light body. But there's such a massive amount of love that emanates from that realm that when you're in the presence of those types of beings, it melts you. It melts you like butter, because just being in that loving, intense presence, and ultimately through all the duality and all the different things we are dealing with in life, the goal really is to develop that love and that compassion, because really that is the key element to what's, going to really get you to that next place that's going to be so much more beautiful and enlightening. So with all that being said, you've really gone through a really good amount of information there on the DNA. The other thing I'd like to just mention and get your feedback on as well, we're talking about food, and the breathing techniques are beautiful because I've been around, like I said, um, I've been to India and I've been in the jungles and I've been around some really amazing, amazing people. Um, but food, in general, and this is processed food, which really in the States we're just getting inundated with, really saps your energy. It takes so much energy for the body to process that. And the amount of life or energy that you get out of it, like you were saying, is so minimal. Um, one of the things I've got in the fridge are sprouts. Like I love sprouts and I eat a lot of different sprouts, usually with some olive oil or whatever. But that's living energy. That's living energy that you're bringing into the body. So eating live foods or living foods, if you are going to eat and you want to transition and try to get it more into a healthy mode, is definitely probably something that I know myself I'm becoming much more conscious of. And I've always been somewhat conscious of it to begin with, but as I get older, that analogy that you said when you had lunch and you were driving home and you were feeling tired, yeah, it's like the body's like, guess what? It's going to take so much energy right now to process this food that we're going to need to like take a little energy away from your, normal, everyday thing. And it's like, I need to go take a nap. So, I think that there's a lot of things that are kind of connected, like we were saying earlier, when it comes to your lifestyle, your diet, all these different things that are holding you into a lower vibrational reality. And if you can start disattaching from those, but I think the first thing you have to do is you have to be conscious of it, right? You have to understand what it is, how it works, and what it's going to take. And in normal process, you'll do it in layers. Maybe you start switching from this and you start, substituting a different food or a different item in for the meal, and then start getting to a point where it's like, hey, you know what? I'm actually really good right now. And I'm only doing this because it's habit. I'm not actually doing it probably even because I'm hungry. I'm just doing it because I'm so programmed that this is my routine, that you kind of take a look back and say, okay, let's look at this a little bit more constructively and see what we really actually need, and then start making those changes. So, with all that being said, I really like the fact that we're talking about the Vedic cultural things, the pranayam, the prana, breathing, all that. That's all things that are thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history that have shown to be extremely beneficial, oxygenating the blood, all these other things that are just, we start losing that. Not only that, but just staying and maintaining the body in a position where you're still maintaining a good spinal connection, a good spinal, uh, you're not getting all the curvature of the spine, all those different things that we got from our modern society. So with all that thrown back at you, what are your thoughts um, on the foods, the diet, and some of the other things? What are two or three things that you would recommend for people that would be starter steps, what they could start making changes in their lives to start getting more of the DNA repair and start getting more into like this healthier vibration that we're talking about?
Okay, well, I am an advocate of a vegetarian or vegan diet because of the hormones placed into the meat. It's
Hmm.
not normal for chickens to grow full size within literally weeks,
Hmm.
and the same with cattle. I was a vegan and still am, or for a long, long time. But what I noticed, and this is where your awareness comes in, that you start noticing what makes you feel good and what makes you not feel good. I'm very blessed. I don't like coffee, never have liked coffee. Um, so I noticed that certain things just started disappearing from my diet. So I would first say awareness. Notice when you eat something, does it lift your energy or deplete your energy? So awareness is the first port of call. I would also advocate a parasite cleanse because most people don't parasite cleanse
Hmm.
and they have no idea how pervasive and how over time parasites can really invade every part of your system
Hmm.
and impact you.
Hmm.
That many ailments come and stem from certain types of parasites.
Hmm.
So I would advocate parasite cleansing on a regular basis. That also means getting your detox organs working good because it's no point doing a parasite cleanse if you can't get them out. So you need to be able to, make sure that all the organs are working. Often people go on water fasting, but again, when you're water fasting, there's the microplastics in the water. So I recommend dry fasting because even one day of dry fasting is equivalent to 3 days of water fasting. And what happens in dry fasting is your body is squeezed and it starts releasing its own endogenous water. The myth that we're going to, start dying after 3 days without water is just not true. If you are full of toxins, though, you're going to struggle on a dry fast. Your mouth is going to be completely dry. So, what I share with people in terms of maybe just starting with dry fasting is stop drinking earlier, any liquid earlier in the evening. And instead of when you wake up, reaching for something to drink first thing, wait another hour, which means then you've gone, instead of 8 hours without anything to drink, you've gone maybe 9 or 10. And you start just lengthening that to allow the body and to squeeze the body to start releasing its own endogenous water. So there's a lot of research on dry fasting coming out of Russia in particular, Dr. Sergei Filanov. And there's also a fantastic book by an American called August Dunning, The Phoenix Protocol, which is also on dry fasting. Another option is intermittent fasting. And there's different ways that you can choose to intermittent fast because, again, the benefit is you're breaking the conditioning that it's breakfast time I need to eat, it's lunchtime I need to eat, it's dinner time I need to eat. Oh, it's time for a snack. And just, when you do take something to eat, ask yourself, what am I really hungry for?
Hmm.
Am I really hungry for food? But what need is being satisfied? I mean, you talked about, love being such a wonderful energy, a wonderful frequency. And, all organisms read energy, but as humans, we've got very lazy. Yet we do know when we go into a room, you feel a good vibe or a bad vibe, or you're with somebody and you feel drained, and other times you're with people and you feel lifted. Like, to me, we're having a nourishing conversation. So getting people to think about nourishment above and beyond food, and that it doesn't just have to be food. that it could be a nourishing conversation, nourishing music, a walk in nature, or being out with friends. There's so many other ways to nourish yourself so that people start to think of that in a different way. And as I said, dry fasting, intermittent fasting, I would strongly suggest start those, but cleanse first. And I'm not a great believer in having a cupboard full of supplements because, again, you're putting, and from my research, there's not much research that actually guarantees that a lot of these supplements work. You can flush a lot of them down the toilet. So I'm a great believer in less is more and getting your body back into balance to do what it does best, which
Hmm.
means give your body a rest, detox, parasite cleanse, and then allow it to come back into balance.
Hmm. I love that. So when you talk about parasite cleanse, one of the things that I've recently started doing is I make this little, I call it a soup, but what it is, it's a mixture of chili powder, turmeric, um, curry powder, and cayenne, and some lemon juice, and I actually put it sometimes a little salsa. I just, I saw some studies within the last few weeks that were showing how turmeric is really good for knocking out parasites. And so, this little soup mix that I call it is kind of like my favorite little thing because when I'm feeling a little bit of hunger, I want to bring a little bit of fire, one of the dashas, right? Bring some fire into the diet there, so to speak. Um, but in addition to, maybe that, can you recommend like maybe a couple things that are good for parasite cleanse that are just natural diet things that we can find in the normal store that might be good for knocking those out?
Okay, so there's different types of parasites, different
Right.
types of parasite cleanse, but just to get started on an easy level, the simplest would be oregano oil.
Or, okay,
Or I think you pronounce it differently in the States.
oregano.
Yes, that's the way. That's the
Yes,
one.
oregano oil.
Now, only one drop in juice in the morning and one drop in the evening. And if you can, build up to a couple of drops. But I'm telling you, even one drop, you'll taste it. It's quite strong
It's
stuff.
very strong.
It's
It's
very
very
strong.
strong.
So that's really, really good. Then there's things like wormwood, and other things that you can easily get as a supplement as well. But wormwood's very good. Um, I also suggest maybe the colonic or enema bags. They're very good. You can use pine resin turpentine. But again, literally, I'm talking a few drops, a few drops. You don't want to sort of power out your system. But there are also lots of recipes, so to speak, if you use the enema or colonic bags. And they're very quick, very, very efficient to start flushing your system. And people can contact me for a whole, update on parasite cleansing and parasite eliminators as well, because it should be, like a 5 week protocol or 2 weeks, take a week off, and then you start again for another couple of weeks. Then you take a break. If you've got animals, you parasite cleanse your animals, but you also need to be doing yourself as well. So it
Mhm.
is something that needs to be done quite regularly. And I'm very blessed. I didn't know it at the time, but my mother used to put something in the stew or the pot when we were being fed as children. And I don't know any parents who do that these days, but it's very, very necessary. So those are a couple of things that are just easy to start with parasite cleansing.
I love that. I love that. So I'm glad you brought up. I want to know what are the best ways to contact you. Give us all your contact information. And even though you're going to give it to us now, during the editing process, I am going to have your main contact information, your website, or whatever channels, whatever it is that you want. But what's the best way for people to reach you and learn more about you?
Okay, so my website is thepossibilityhub.com, Instagram, Carol K. Talbot. And email Carol at thepossibilityhub.com. So I'm easy to find.
Gosh, Dr. Carroll, you just have so much knowledge. I love the fact that you've just
So do
been like
you.
Well, you've just been like a student of like, oh my God, I need to learn more about this and I need to know more about all these different subjects. And there's so many that are sort of intertwined with me. And I'm like, oh my God, I get really excited to talk to you because, a lot of the stuff that I am kind of doing, you're very knowledgeable on. So there is that part of it where I'm kind of talking to somebody that really is in my world with a lot of the things that I do. We're talking about conscious energy. Well, all these crystals are little conscious energies, and the funny thing is, we were just saying this earlier, everything's talking to me, but I'm just not doing a good job listening. So, as life goes on, and the number one thing I think always is the ananda, right? Is the bliss. And
Yes.
regardless of anything in life, you have to remain blissful because once the mode of seriousness comes into play, the whole music stops and now you're really trapped into this third dimensional realm. So the goal with some of the people that I know from my background are like, as crazy as things get, there comes a point where in order to release that, you've got to be able to laugh yourself through it. And as crazy as it gets, right? And there's always the analogy of you're going to go over the falls, right? There's a point in time where you can be on the canoe and you can be paddling as hard as you can against the current, but eventually you have to surrender to it and kind of put your hands up and say, here we go, and just have faith and trust that the lives, the experiences, all those things are happening for a reason, and then try to embrace all that and go with the flow and kind of, find your place. I call it the river of life. Sometimes you're going down the rapids and you're getting banged up. Sometimes you're in a nice little calm pool and you just want to sit and hang out. But, throughout that process, you try to, process it as best you can and find that place where you can sort of eventually smile and process all that life experience. So, thank you so much for taking the time to be on with us today. Before we go, though, I always like to give a final word or final bit of advice or any final thoughts on anything you'd like to share with the audience. And I do promise everybody watching this, we will have Dr. Carol back. But before we go today, is there anything else you'd like to share before we call it an episode?
I one of my mentors always said to me, do what you do best and do it well. And I love that, and I love learning and I love sharing, and I know you do as well. And so, when you do what you do well, or do what you do best and do it well, that also brings in a certain frequency, a certain
Mhm.
energy. You talked about presence, and I believe your presence should be a present, a gift to other people. And sometimes we need to be reminded when the hustle and bustle of life comes along that, hey, what can I do to be in that sort of, you called it the river of life. I like to call it the wheel of fortune, because wherever you are, it's always moving round. But to when you're with people, to be present and to make sure that you're the elevator, that you're lifting energy through your presence and through everything you do and through the language, the words that you say. And I know that's something that you live by, Sean, totally.
Yeah,
So thank you for this gift and this opportunity.
yes, thank you. And I think that's where we're so similar again, is that I just feel love and compassion is like the ultimate gift that you can give anybody, and a smile or a pleasant word or a compliment or, the duality of life is always I'm this and you're that. And I've totally transcended that. Not that I'm some, ascended master by any stretch, um, but you know what? I've gotten to the point where I'm like, hey, you know what? I love everybody, and they're all in different stages of development, understanding, and I'm not here to judge that. I'm just here to give them the love and support, whether they agree, disagree. It's all good. I mean, I don't, I know that by giving out that love, and I've really been in that mode now for a decent amount of my adult life, but especially in the last 4 to 5 years, I think I've really started dialing that in and really just dropping things and not getting into opinion-based realities and just saying, hey, this is just the way that the whole thing works. And, my job is to really give out the love and compassion because ultimately, and I'm so close to death on a daily basis here, with what I do with my work. Um, that's the only thing that's going to go with you is the love and compassion. You know, the love is the one thing that you'll take with you, and that'll be the one thing that'll empower more people than any technology will be the love, the compassion, and the belief that, you know, you're there for them and that you care
And
about them.
particularly if people are transitioning and allow them to transition well. What
Hmm.
a gift. What
Yes.
a gift.
So thank you for sharing the love, the knowledge, and thank you for the life's path that you've chosen, which is helping us get the operator's manual for our body, for our mind, for our soul. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for being on today, and I can't wait to see you again here soon.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you.